Hey guys, Steve here from 21st Century Physio podcast, and have we got a massive episode today. We've got the Steve Jobs of physiotherapy, Mick Rizk, co-founder of iMove and iMove U. And today he's going to share his secrets that helped him take his one practice to 3 practices within the space of 3 years. He's also going to teach us how he runs those 3 practices without any reception or admin staff, and how he takes his team overseas each year to build the culture in his organisation to increase his retention of physiotherapists. Really massive episode. Really looking forward to speaking to Mick. Let's get into it. Well, welcome, Mick. Welcome to the 21st Century Physio podcast. It's a real honour to have you on here today, and I'm sure all the listeners are looking really excited to some of the great knowledge bombs that you're going to drop on the podcast.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for inviting me on.
No worries at all. Well, do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background at iMove?
Yeah, Dan and I started iMove 4 years ago, but well before that we were working in private practice. It'd only been 3 years, so we're quite young, and we were just talking about some of our frustrations in private practice. It was around when Facebook was booming, and I know for me, our private practice wasn't doing any social media, just little things like that, and then you start to think bigger and bigger and how you could do things better. And we decided we were actually drunk at a party and had a conversation about starting a practice.
And then that's where all the best ideas come.
That's how you know it's legitimate. And then Dan called me the next morning and said, "Are you still serious about what we spoke about last night?" And it all went from there.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So 4 years down the track now, obviously a big journey. You've now got 3 clinics, over the last 3 years or so. Tell us about how you've gone about that and your expansion, because that's some pretty rapid growth.
Yeah, we started in Rozelle. The basic premise was we were going to open either in Sutherland, which is where I'd lived at the time, or Rozelle, which is where Dan lived at the time. So we thought it was important to open that first clinic where we had an established network. So we chose Rozelle. We just found a beautiful space, lots of light, good size, went for it. And then about a year or two in, we got offered a place in Panania, which is a southwestern suburb of Sydney.
Yep. And
that's actually right next to where I grew up. So again, it felt right because I had a network. I played for the local soccer club and cricket club. And Miranda was actually very similar. My first 3 years in private practice was in the Shire. So the 3 practices we actually all had a connection to locally.
Fantastic. It's always good to have that nice network when you start up a practice. It really helps hit the ground running.
Yeah. It's nice to, when we went back to Panania, I was treating the parents of the people I went to school with. So just to have that instant rapport straight away. It's
nice to build that community. So I'm in a similar practice myself, about 2 kilometres from where I went to school and where I grew up. So it's funny, you see all the parents, they raise you and then all of a sudden you start to take over their care. So it's sort of goes that full circle, I think. It's nice.
I ended up treating my maths teacher and I still couldn't call her by her first name. I had to call her Mrs. Harris.
That's funny. Did she give you any tests when she came in?
No, but she remembers my maths wasn't great. So
yeah, I don't think there's too many people these days with all the technology we've got. Lucky we don't rely on that too heavily as physiotherapists. So you said you're frustrated with where you're working. There was things that you could do better yourself. What were some of those things? You mentioned social media was one of them.
Yeah, I think the owners were fantastic. I actually had written them a letter last year thanking them for everything, and maybe that I was not showing the gratitude I should have when I was there, because they were fantastic mentors and very switched on, but they were in the business full time, and I think that just really affected their ability to mentor, to expand. Also, they'd been there for 30 years, so they didn't need to do anything new or exciting, which is understandable. It was just a build-up of all those little things. The owners being in the business, not being modern, not needing to update, even evidence-based, and I'm starting to follow these mentors online that they hadn't heard of. So, and then, of course, you start thinking, well, they're taking 50% of the income, so if I could do it better, why not?
Yep, I think we all get to that point some stage in our career.
Yeah.
I think what you're doing though, with your iMove U, is got some really great potential to hopefully stop people getting to that stage. And that was one of the reasons that I started this podcast as well. Is I got to that stage very early in my career where I realised, look, what I was doing as an osteopath initially, probably wasn't getting the results that I wanted. And for me, that ended up me going back to study and then eventually going out on my own as well. So I think the more people we can keep motivated, the more people we can keep in the profession and with a structured learning environment like you're providing with iMove, U is a great thing. So do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about the iMove U program?
Yeah, we have actually exclusively only hired new grads at iMove, just because that's the way it panned out. And we just started seeing the same problems. So we thought there's a huge gap between university and private practice and the expectations of an employer for a new grad. Much like you were just saying with this podcast, is you're getting the same questions over and over. Yeah. So we just created a free Facebook page and have started inviting students into that. We provide content, tips and tricks, practicality around biopsychosocial model, how we should approach manual therapy, how we should rebook. And then I've been lucky enough to build a relationship with the people that have had me on course, like Adam Meekins and Greg Lehman. And they've allowed me to give their best tips at iMove U. So that's been awesome. And students love getting a little bit from everywhere and then being able to make their own decision.
Yep, well, I just did Adam Meekins' course on the weekend. I can definitely vouch for that as a really high-quality course. So glad to hear that you're on the same page, and a lot of the stuff that he taught fits my bias, which is really good. Can drink a couple of pints of beer as well, old Adam. So,
what did you think of the porn star and bastard?
Good manoeuvres. Personally, I might not have gone with the same names. I'm probably not as creative, and we probably definitely have to put a rating on this podcast if I use some of the language that he used throughout the day.
We're beeping that out, are we?
Yeah, we'll get him on a podcast shortly, I'm sure. So we talked about some of those challenges, some of the areas that you think new graduates, you've worked with a lot of them now, need to improve. What are those key areas, and then how do you go about improving those things? You talked about rebooking rates. What are some of your key strategies or some of the key things that you talk to your mentorees about?
Yeah, rebooking is huge. But if you just come at it from a numbers perspective with new grads, they have a huge moral and ethical kickback. And they all think they can get people better in 2 or 4 sessions. But it's not the reality of the biopsychosocial model. If we're going to treat humans, we have to understand the psychology and mentality and patient rapport. And you can't do that in 3 sessions. And then very commonly, new grads are the ones who get patients cancel around that 3rd and 4th booking because they haven't laid down the education or the relationship to get someone better. So we focus a lot on that. A little mantra we have is 5 in 2. We try to get patients 5 bookings in 2 weeks to allow for 1 cancellation, which might happen because life gets busy. That allows 2 consults in the first week, 2 consults in the second week. Since doing that, the buy-in and compliance at the 6th, 7th, and 8th week, when patients need to be doing exercises to get stronger, has gone through the roof.
And all of a sudden, in 2 weeks, I really like that model. You've actually, given yourself a chance to help that person and to educate them, most importantly, rather than doing those 5 sessions over 5 or 6 or 8 weeks sometimes as a new graduate. By the time you've got to that point, they've already moved on, haven't they?
That's right. And we talk a lot about males, females in their 40s and 50s who their whole life think that a disc bulge requires surgery or is a catastrophic injury. And you can't change 40 years of education in 1 session a week. And you really had to come at it from that angle with new grads, because as employers, if we just say 4 in 2, naturally they're thinking the financial rewards.
Yeah, definitely. It's I think one of those big myths that you got to bust from people. Yeah, as clinic owners, we definitely need to make a profit, but to get the best results for our patients, we actually need to provide them that level of service and that advice. So I think they're really great tips. So when you do have people, booking that 5 sessions in 2 weeks, what are some of the things you give them to help them with that rebooking process?
Some of the things we give the students or the client?
Both.
Yeah, I think Adam Meekins' tip is really good, even though I think he would hate the 5 in 2 model.
Yeah, he definitely would. Saying that, listening to some of his podcasts and some of his blogs, he would see a patient once. You'd get the impression that you see a patient once and then never see him again, which was totally opposite to what he said in his course. I think he's probably actually a bit closer to that model than he gives the impression on social media.
I think so. Some of the tips are a patient's learning a new language. They're learning anatomy for the first time. Adam Meekins showed a slide that I think your client will forget 80% of what you say in the consult, and then 50% of that's misinterpreted.
Correct. Yep.
So if we're educating new anatomy, we're educating that new exercises, 6 to 8 weeks, the Toblerone effect. It's a lot of information, and you probably shouldn't give all of that in the first consult. Therefore, you need a second consult quite quick and a third consult so you can layer that information and the patient remembers it rather than just dumping it on them. They forget 80% of it. Then because they've forgotten, they go and talk to their dad who's had fusion, and then now they're booked in to see a surgeon. So we had to give some of those practical examples, and that happens to most new clinicians.
Yep. And I usually use the thing, patients will remember 2 things from each consultation. So make those 2 things, bang for their buck, what's going to be the most important thing for them to remember to make sure that they come back so you can continue to help them again. Yeah,
that's right. And you want to create lasting lifetime change. And again, that takes education, rapport, social history. You won't get that with 1 visit a week in the first little while.
Yeah. So do you give the patients anything to take home on that first session when you're setting up that plan? Or do you use any technology or any other means to communicate with them in between the sessions?
Yeah, we've just been getting mentoring by a group called Clinic Mastery, and they have implemented a management plan, which is just a very concise 1-page summary with what the diagnosis is, what the time frame is, and how many expected consults. That's so if they go home and the husband asks, "What'd the physio say?" it's right there. Whereas if you go home and say, "What'd the physio say?" and they're like, "Oh, I'm not sure. I think it's my rotor cuff," which is what they often say instead of rotator cuff. So the management plan's been great. It's increased compliance and buy-in.
Fantastic. So obviously your practice has grown a lot in the last 3 years. What are some of the biggest problems that you faced, through that growth period?
Oh, big problems. I think the biggest problem you face is recruitment and retention, and then when someone leaves, that can really just put brakes on your plans for 6 to 12 months. So if you can minimize that at the start, that would be fantastic. Every time someone's left, it's almost like a sledgehammer snowball effect for 3 to 6 months.
Yep. And so what do you think we can do to set ourselves up better so we are retaining those employees for longer periods of time?
Yeah, it's all culture, I think. It's a very clear pathway and even multiple pathways. So now we've taken a high income pathway, a side business pathway, or a leadership and management pathway. And this is laid down now when you start at iMove. So you can see that in my 2nd or 3rd year, I'm going to have a choice of diverging, and I'm going to work with my employers to make this happen. That's been huge for our clarity and our recent new grads.
Awesome. So what are those pathways? What do they involve?
Yeah, so at about the 3rd year, because we still believe the first 2 or 3 years is clinical skills, building yourself a reputation. And then at the end of the 2nd year, we ask them which pathway they would like to take. Leadership pathway is you might now run our CPDs and the clinic catch-ups, which means you have to be across all our movement partners and all the offers and all the talks we're doing. So that's for someone who likes to be a leader. We have a management pathway, which takes a more senior role. They would get a percentage of the practice revenue. And then there's others who say, hey, I want to have kids. I want to be home at 4 p.m. every night. Can we make that roster happen? So just making it clear that as an employer, you're flexible and serious about making it a place for lifestyle, not just work.
Yep. That's extremely important, I think. And, one of the reasons that I was really keen to get you onto the podcast was, from the outside looking at your business, you can see that strong sense of culture. And it looks like you run a lot of tutes for your staff. You run some weekly or monthly sort of catch-ups, and you even take your team away.
Yeah, we do a lot. It's been layered over 3 years. We have a clinic weekly catch-up. We also have a clinic weekly hands-on, which we just block out in the diary. And then outside of that, every single week on a Wednesday, between 12 and 2, we meet at one of the clinics, all staff members. So it's a big commitment. They have to travel, some of them an hour, to get to this. And that just creates vibe and family and learning, and it's allowed us to build a strong culture.
That's awesome. And so with that culture, have you found any, as you've started to implement that, have you found any differences in the retention of those new graduates that you're getting in? Have you found that's helped improve that buy-in to your processes?
Absolutely. But it's also been a method of deselection. So there have been employees that have said, like, it's really great you offer that and that we get to go away for 5 days a year and that we have CPD every week. But I'm an experienced clinician. I don't want that. I don't need that. It's just a really good and honest conversation, because you can say, well, I'd love to help you find a job that suits your needs. This is really important to us. And since that kind of culling process happened, we lost a couple of staff members. The group since then has been unbelievably strong and very clear on the goal.
I think it's a really good method to use. I think you've got to try and, like you would with your patient, work with the individual. Said treat the individual, don't treat the body part or the condition. And I think that's a really good application of that philosophy in your practice too. So everyone who listens to the podcast knows that I love technology. So I'm a technology geek, especially when it comes to either business systems or just getting better outcomes with our patients. What are some different bits of technology, different bits of software that you use and you couldn't live without in your practice?
I'm loving PhysiTrack, which is exercise prescription, and you can even do online consults now. Have you done one?
I have, yes.
Yeah. I haven't been brave enough yet. I'm waiting for the right patient.
It's definitely a new, bit of a daunting way, but I think it's definitely the future. I can see there's a lot of people that are really time poor these days, and a lot of the time what we're doing is education, reassurance, and then providing some simple, exercise-based rehabilitation, which, as long as there's different ways that you can use to get objective data to know that they're improving, and there's lots of different options for patients and clients out there to get objective data themselves at home, I think there's no reason why we can't, incorporate that into part of our sessions.
How many online consults are you doing a week? Is it regular?
A regular? Yes, I'd be doing half a dozen a week probably.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And the listeners to the podcast, we've got some other technology coming out over the next 6 months or so, which will, will help people be able to do that as well at home.
Yeah, that's cool. I'll have to talk to you more about that. And we're also using HiCaps Go, which isn't quite there yet, but I'm excited about once they have all the health funds on it. It's basically payment at the click of a button through your mobile, which means you don't need receipts, you don't need the HiCaps machine. You may not even need a receptionist. We don't have a receptionist at any of our clinics, but that would actually make the more traditional clinic a lot easier to make that move.
I definitely think it's a really positive. We've used it with a few patients. As you said, It's still a bit of room for improvement, but I think the just patients knowing what they're going to be out of pocket before they come in, it stops some of that awkwardness at that front desk as well. And again, I think they're just more committed to the process once they do know that up front as well. Yeah.
And I'd say clinic-wise, Runmatic. Runmatic is my favorite tool to use for a run consult, which we do a lot of. It's I think it captures you at 30 frames a second, maybe even 60 frames a second. They've done studies on it to show that it's within 95 to 98% of the gold standard, which is going down to NSWIS and putting the motion sensors on you. And you get data like ground reaction force, vertical oscillation, and cadence. You make a quick change, you reassess them with Runmatic, and it just gives you a beautiful chart of how all the numbers changed. So that's my favorite clinical tool at the moment.
And for people who don't know what Runmatic is, do you want to explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's just an app. It's on iOS only at the moment. and it just helps you with your running analysis. So it's actually filming software, but it gives you some great running data.
Yep, fantastic. And how many running consults would you do a week with that?
Oh, we probably do 10 running consults a week at Rozelle, but I would say 50% of our clientele are runners.
And was that a natural evolution for the clinic, or was that something you specifically set out to do?
Yeah, it wasn't. We started at Rozelle, which is quite close to the Bay Run, which is a beautiful run around the Bay, and it's 7K. So we found ourselves in a strong running market. Then I was lucky enough to go to London and do Blaise Dubois' course, the running clinic.
Yep.
Became extremely interested, and then met Christopher Johnson from the Runners Zone in person. And fantastic resource, isn't he?
He is, definitely.
Yeah. So it evolved into our specialty.
Oh, that's awesome. So you mentioned, you're big on other people in your practice having, a side hustle. So you've mentioned a couple of those to me before we started rolling the podcast. Do you want to give us a little bit of insight and again, why you sort of decided to bring that in as part of your business model?
Yeah, I think it's really important that physios or any allied health don't see themselves as just that title, because I've experienced we all start to get bored at around 3 to 4 years. It's not like a bank where you're going up a ladder, you're a physio, and then 5 years later, you're still a physio. So you can get bored. So the side hustle is to keep people interested and to let them know they can build a life outside of physio, and that physio could just be a vehicle for them to achieving other great things.
Yep.
So at our retreat in Bali, we asked every person to create a side business. So a few that we had was one white T-shirt. It's like the perfect white T-shirt that everyone needs to own. iMove Money, which is a vlog and blog about what it's like to be in your 20s, have no money, but still be interested in the share market, which is one of our employees, Colin Wong's side passion. And a running holiday, iMove Explore.
Yep. And so you look to implement these in as part of the iMove brand?
Yes, some will be. If our employees would love our help, we'll definitely help them. And we've actually started building web pages and Instagram pages for them. Others just want to keep it themselves. So we've got a guy, Hayden, who's created his own CrossFit ebook.
Yep.
And we've just given him tips along the way.
Sensational. And that becomes a great resource for your practice, I imagine, too, that people can start to his patients and clients, and builds his niche as well, which I think is very important, especially for new graduates coming out.
Yeah, it gives them a lot of autonomy, a lot of purpose. And yeah, it will always, in the long run, there will be some benefits for iMove as a whole as well. So it's win-win for everyone.
Definitely. So look, you're obviously at the cutting edge of practice. You're pushing the boundaries in regard to people management. You're obviously running a very efficient clinic, no reception. Tell us about that. It's, most practices your size or with multiple locations would have, full-time reception staff plus, probably across all 3 locations. So how do you manage that?
Well, when we started, it was necessity, right?
Yep.
Just 2 guys, and you had to split the profits because we're a partnership. And then the need just never arose. The patients loved that we greeted them when we walked in.
Yep.
And the patients loved that we would do their bookings. And I know a lot of practices are spending huge training and time resources on their reception staff to get scripts right and rebookings right, whereas the physio just does that. Like that to me, that makes sense. The only real issue is who's answering your phones and payment. But if High Caps Go can get rid of payment, the only real thing would be who answers out phones. We've had to be a bit clever about that. We have a strong answering machine that says, please book online. And there is a bit of deselection. We have found we then naturally start to get patients who book online, which is fantastic. But we do have to get back to our phone calls at 7, at 11, at 2, and again at 7 p.m.
Yep.
So there are ways around it. Clinic Mastery Group have found you can outsource your phone calls now to a couple of companies in Melbourne who are Australian and know the health profession. So yeah, there's a few ways around it.
Yep, definitely. We've tried a few of those different methods as well. We found some have been more successful than others.
What's been good?
Definitely not some of those phone companies that we've used
Yep.
in the past,
Yep.
sort of just for time that you spend setting up. And then I had myself testing out this initial service. I waited 15 minutes on a playback message before my phone call was answered. So if all our patients are going to be doing that, they've hung up after 20 seconds or so. So for us, it's about a personal thing. I think what you're doing is really great. You make it about the people in the business, and people know, if they know that you can get back to them pretty quickly. I think most of the time they're happy to wait for that too.
Yeah, and if you're being really honest, I would say we might lose one client a week at each practice, and who knows, that could be 3 referrals and $20,000 over a lifetime. But the fact is, we've grown really well, and we've built rapport in other ways. So we get to have that final conversation when the patient walks out, and the first conversation when the patient walks in. And I really do believe that balances the books as far as missing that phone call a week.
Definitely. So where do most of your referrals come from, and how do you go about generating those?
We're pretty strong in the community. So we'll do a talk at an F45, CrossFit, any of the local running groups. We do that once every 2 or 3 months. But also we offer the leader of those groups basically physio on us, and in return they allow our staff members to train with them for free, which is also a great win-win for our staff members.
Fantastic. It also keeps them in the environment and at front of mind for that referrer as well. I've found that's a really good strategy for us as well.
Yeah, you've got to be in the community as a physio, and if you're training in the community, there's no better way.
Definitely. So how do you find getting your team to, buy into that stuff and get them to actually, go and train down there and stuff? Have you found that's been something that they've actually naturally wanted to do, or you've had to push them towards a little bit more?
Yeah, and that was a cultural thing, again, that was important to us, that did lead to deselection with some staff. We just had to show them that you can create your own niche. You can end up seeing the clients you want. You can be busier and therefore start to design your own roster by doing these extra 1%ers. So part of it is they have to see it. They have to see it to believe it. So getting out there as the leader of the clinic and doing a few of those. But then building it to their niche. So you wouldn't get the CrossFitter to go to the running group. You'd get the CrossFitter to go to the CrossFitter group. So even when you're onboarding them, asking them what community groups would they like to approach, so they've got a sense of buy-in and autonomy.
Yep, fantastic. I think really nice tips there. So where do you see physiotherapy in 10 years, 20 years' time? You're obviously at the cutting edge of, as I said, that building the team and the culture. You're growing, quicker than most people out there, I'd imagine. What are some things that you think, physiotherapy is going to need to do in the future, and how's it going to look?
I don't know. I'm pretty nervous, actually. I'm nervous about some of our governing bodies' guidelines and restrictions around marketing.
Yep.
I'm nervous that we've got fantastic EPs and chiros that are less restricted, and they're doing such a fantastic job.
Yep.
I think EPs are taking a huge part of the market,
Yep.
But they're doing it the right way. They're educating GPs, and they're doing a great thing. Most of our physios have exercise science as a background, so we completely get that. And I'm also sensing a bit of a backlash from patients and private health insurance. So we're going to have to be better at attracting a full fee paying client. And that's using technology like PhysiTrack, HiCaps Go, being social on social media, not just providing information. Yep. We're really going to have to be a place where people love to come. Yep. So that's where I see it going. But I don't know. It's a bit bleak. What do you think? I thought that would be more positive.
I'm a bit depressed now.
Yeah, I know.
My 7 years of study, you just thrown it out the window.
Yeah.
So, but no, I think the future is quite bright. But I think we do, as physiotherapy as a profession, I think has to rebrand itself. I think, as you said, some of the, bigger, the older, more successful practices are often, maybe not staying up to date, still providing evidence-based treatments, running off a 15-minute or 20-minute schedule. And not providing that service and that education that patients need, and probably not getting the results as well. One thing that we're big on at Matt is making sure that you really provide a really thorough assessment, gathering as much objective data so you can make better clinical decisions and educate the patient about why they actually need to go home and do their homework, and empowering them rather than just bringing them back for a 10-minute mob on the spine and sending them on their way.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think the more educated physios do that really well. And it's probably what the EPs have been doing from day one. So we'll probably see this natural decline of the old school physio.
I think you're right. I think the EPs are definitely, branding themselves very well. They filled a really nice spot in the market, which, physiotherapy is left wide open for them.
Yeah.
And I think you hit on the head with some of the marketing and some of the restrictions there around, especially around the use of testimonials. I think that's something that they're doing really well as a profession is, using that patient experience to drive more people in through the door.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll probably, I don't know how much trouble we'll get into if we mention specific rules, but yeah, I think we're thinking the same thing.
So I think there's going to be a lot of people out there, especially some of the new graduates, are feeling a bit disillusioned, like we both have in our practice, getting to that 2 to 3 years out. Obviously, you've got a great service you provide for those type of people with the iMovie program. How can they, what does it involve first? And how do people get involved? How do they find you?
Yeah, iMovie is just a Facebook page. So it's all one word, little I, move, and capital U. Just join that group. And there's 400 members so far, predominantly students. We're posting footage from our CPD, our weekly catch-ups, and you'll usually get 2 or 3 selfie-style videos of me giving some clinical tips of the week. So that's been really helpful. And then 3 or 4 times a year, we're holding a one-day course where we get into specifics. My favorite part of that is I'll show you 5 or 6 techniques on each part of the body from all the courses I've done. So I would like to call it the best first course to do if you're a new grad.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And so when's the next date?
We're going to go in April. I don't have a date yet, but this is to help the MacU students because they graduate mid-year and get some of the Sydney students who missed out on the last one. So I hope to have 2 in the middle of the year and another one at the end of the year.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, everyone, if you want to go out there, have a look at the iMovie program, go and join the Facebook group. I'm sure all the details will be on there as soon as they're released.
Yeah.
Really appreciate you for spending time today, Mick, coming and having a chat with us on the 21st Century Physio podcast. I think some of the stuff you're doing definitely is helping physiotherapy move forward and helping it come into the 21st century. So thank you.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me on.